it's a fine day for exposing corruption. Are men and women treated equally under the UK law? Surely the law applies to everybody regardless of skin colour, background, creed. However, recent examples and statistical examples throughout history would indicate that this is not the case, and I'm going to do a deep dive into exactly why that is. And also, at the end of this video, I'm going to be discussing a real life case that I dealt with, which was very sinister in nature, and yet the sentencing will appall you. Now, the problem with the justice system is that it's run by people. People are infallible, people make mistakes, people are open to suggestion, manipulation, and of course empathy. Now, on paper, the justice system should work equally for everybody regardless of skin colour, background, gender, sexual orientation or creed. However, recent examples would insinuate or certainly point towards that that isn't necessarily the case, and we are in fact not all equal under the law. If this is your first time seeing my face, my name is Darkmoore and I was a police officer for just under 10 years. In my role as a police officer, I dealt with stalking cases, domestic violence cases, control and coercive cases, as well as having insight, input and dealing firsthand with various other cases. So I like to think I have a good idea both frontline and what happens once an arrest has been made when it comes to custodial sentences. Not only that, but I have the power of the internet here to help me to hash out some of these topics. I also write crime fiction, and you can purchase my book, the Detective Laura Warburton series, off Amazon, and that will also support me greatly. Let's look at the offending rates of men and women compared to each other. So, offending statistics, men are far more likely to commit crimes than women, especially violent crimes, which, when you think about it, makes sense. Men have evolved to be aggressive, to, testosterone running through our bodies. Naturally, we are more inclined to be reactive, and with our strength and stature, it explains in the statistics as to why men in 2023 to 2024 total of 271,987 times, compared to just 63,188 arrests for women. While women are more likely to commit offences such as fraud and shoplifting, men are more likely to commit violent crimes, robbery, assaults and public order offences. Now, of course, the reasons for this could be a biological factor or maybe a societal factor. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Are men more naturally inclined to be aggressive, or does society raise men to be more aggressive? Now, of course, you may be inclined to jump in the comments and say, well, men have the best, most CEOs are men, and people that are high achievers are men, and everything to do with the world is bad because of men, but men do all these other things, so therefore they are the ones that need to be punished the most because they have the most privilege. But then you are looking at a very small subset of hyper successful men to base your opinion on that. And by saying that, you are completely ignoring the amazing women that manage to do so well in their lives too. But equally are ignoring the entire demographic of men that are actually more disadvantaged when it comes to society, education, etc. compared to women. A few examples of this are as follows. In education, men are more likely to struggle. Boys are underperforming in schools, making up a high proportion of the most excluded from education and failing to achieve exams. Homelessness. Over 90% of homeless people in the UK are men, highlighting a gender disparity in housing and support services. Mental health. Men are more likely to experience severe mental health issues, but are less likely to seek help due to stigma surrounding mental health in men. I have many examples of this in my book, The Job Is Fucked, Secret Diary of a Police Officer, which you can pre-order in the description. If we take the premise of men are at an advantage when it comes to society, then surely that would mean that men get mistreated and punished more severely when it comes to the justice system. But as we've just discussed, we see that men are very disadvantaged in every aspect of life as a general rule, and yet are they more punished when it comes to facing charges and facing aspects of criminality? So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the sentencing. So when it comes to sentencing, men consistently receive harsher punishments than women for similar crimes. That means that a man and a woman can commit the same crime, the same offence in the same way, and women are less likely to be sent to prison. Men are more likely to receive a harsher sentence. In 2021, 34% of men sentenced for indictable offences trialled at Crown Court with the wigs and a gown and a judge with a gavel were given immediate custody, meaning you do not go home, do not pass go, straight to jail, while only 17% of women receive the same sentence. So for every 100 men stood there in the dock, 34 of them wouldn't be going home that day, they'd be going straight to prison, compared to only 17 out of 100 women. One argument for this disparity is that women would naturally have more caregiving responsibilities, such as children, a lot of single mums, stay-at-home mums. It's much less common in society for a father to have full custody of their children. Rightly or wrongly, I'll leave that up to you. Therefore, that does come into play in that we would be separating the mother from the child, and therefore the child, if that is their primary caregiver, we would have to safeguard and find adequate care for that child due to a duty of care by the courts. And of course, because it is less common that men would have a sole caring responsibility, not that it doesn't happen, I'm just saying it's less common, they are less likely to receive the same treatment as a result of this caring responsibility. Thus the harsher sentences when it comes to the courts. But is that the only reason? And when it comes to actual prison sentences, men are by far given more longer in prison and harsher sentences for the same crime as when it comes to women. Like I said, we will discuss this at the end of the video where I give you a real life example, so stay for that one. Women tend to be sentenced for less severe crimes, which contributes to shorter sentences on average. So okay, that could be an explanation. Men commit more violent crimes, men commit more serious crimes, therefore overall the sentencing for men is more severe, due to just the nature of which the crimes of which men commit. Women, shoplifting, theft, but then again, fraud. I mean, fraud, you can get a long time in prison for fraud. Often we see that money is more valuable than life, as I discussed in previous videos, but let's not go down that rabbit hole. For example, the average custodial sentence length for men is longer, reflecting not only the crimes committed, but the broader impact of societal expectations. So does that mean that men are expected to behave better, men are expected to act better? But then when we think of the disparity between the upbringings and the failures of the education system when it comes to men's well-being, can we really expect men to act better when we essentially ignore men's mental health and we ignore them and treat them worse in the education system, and more men are homeless and more men are prone to addiction? It's food for thought. But equally, by that same token, if women are supposed to be more caring and more nurturing, then surely the expectation is on them to behave better. Surely by that token of thinking, if a woman breaks that social contract with being a caregiver, being nurturing, being loving, and they commit an act of fraud, which is deceitful, it's a dishonest offence, surely a woman would get a more severe sentence than a man. It's an interesting thought experiment, surely. There is also an argument that gender roles influence these outcomes. Men are often expected to shoulder more responsibility for their actions, whereas women are seen to be more in a rehabilitative lens when it comes to the justice system and wider society. However, does this mean that women are not disadvantaged? Of course not. Women in particular areas such as domestic abuse also face significant barriers. By that standpoint, if a woman has been abused for years and treated absolutely appallingly by their partner, and they then snap and then they commit a homicide of their abuser, should they still receive life in prison? If we look at the mitigating factors, are we all equal under the law? Is it X equals Y every single time? And equally, if a man has had a very poor upbringing and he commits a heinous crime, do we look at his background? Do we say, okay, well, of course he's committed this heinous crime. He had no chance in life. We need to therefore be more lenient on it. However, now what I want to do before I go over to my Patreon section is I want to tell you about a real story, which it was a case I dealt with. And the case, when I investigated it and when I heard the sentencing outcomes, my head absolutely rolled. I couldn't believe what this person got sentenced for the crimes they'd committed. And when you consider if a man committed the crime, the sentencing would have been much more severe, in my opinion. A female that was stalking her ex-boyfriend told me that she wouldn't ever use withheld numbers to contact him. She swore black was white that hundreds of calls that he had received weren't from her. Female to male stalking is rarer, but it does happen. However, the fear of consequences is often different. When a woman is stalked by a man, she is, generally speaking, more fearful of her safety. When a woman stalks a man, the man is, in general, more afraid of reputational damage, them dragging the name through the mud, them calling the police and making false allegations. It's more to do with reputation and how society views them rather than their own personal safety. Now, of course, that's not to say that women can't seriously hurt men and men don't cause reputational damage to women. I'm just speaking in generics. The male and female I'm talking about, we shall refer to as Gabby and Mark. They were in a relationship for a little over a year, and Gabby had a bit of a problem with the white powder. She wasn't working, whereas Mark had a very good job. Gabby would fulfill Mark's every physical desire and then request drugs for them to take together. During the course of the relationship, Gabby had taken a video of Mark dancing around in her underwear with his genitals exposed, and had also filmed him taking drugs in his work uniform. Now, of course, remember, Mark had a very good job. The last thing he would want is for this to get out. The relationship became so volatile that Mark actually tried to leave the relationship, and this is where the escalation began. Gabby then began to call Mark hundreds of times a day. In fact, when I sent Gabby's phone off to the digital forensics unit, they were very surprised with the amount of phone calls that were made. The telecoms data came back. I think they said it was something like 1,100 phone calls in 2 weeks. Now that is an insane amount of calls. Until Mark would answer, Gabby would give him abuse and then would hang up the phone, and then of course Mark, being upset about this, would then try and ring Gabby back a few times, and this cycle would continue and continue, and it would continue for several weeks. Gabby was wanting a response from Mark because she couldn't handle being rejected, she couldn't handle losing what she had with him. There was some indication that Gabby may have some kind of abandonment issues, maybe some kind of personality disorder, but I'm not a psychiatrist, so I can't diagnose that. However, what I have found is when people do have some kind of personality disorder and we look at the criminality, the criminal aspects surrounding this personality disorder, the patterns of behaviour are generally quite clear and generally quite happen over and over again. And I found this with a lot of male and female stalkers, male and female perpetrators of domestic violence, in that majority of the time, a lot of them do lack empathy. They have some kind of childhood trauma. They have, I always hear, oh, but they had a really traumatic childhood, they had a really bad life, and therefore I excuse their behaviour. I'm going to make another video about this, about domestic violence in a bit more detail, but just know that it's all a pattern and it happens consistently through different contexts and different times and people. Gabby would then make different email addresses, different phone numbers. She even downloaded an app on her phone which allowed her to make a different phone number. Now of course we can trace all this, the police can trace all this, so don't for fuck's sake do it. Mark eventually started to withdraw and Gabby's hold on him began to weaken. So remember the video I told you about where Mark was dancing around in Gabby's underwear? She threatened to post this online. So now we have a few offences here. We have stalking and we also have threatening to expose indecent images online, also known as revenge porn. Now this sent Mark into a bit of a spiral, and Mark actually attended Gabby's house and confronted her, of which Gabby then threatened him with a knife. So now we have threatening with a knife, we have stalking with fear of violence now, maximum of 10 years in prison, and we have posting intimate images of somebody online, revenge porn, which is an indictable offence, Crown Court. So the investigation into Gabby took several months. I had to interview Gabby twice. At first she went no comment, she didn't make any comment whatsoever, and she even was sending bits of money through to his bank account with little messages on in an attempt to create a conversation, offering him her body, offering them a good time, offering anything she could think of to try and get a reaction from him. But Mark didn't bite, and Mark came to the police, and we managed to, over several months, collect the evidence, enough evidence to essentially bury Gabby under it. Now here's the rub. When Gabby was charged with stalking, with fear of violence, with threatening to post indecent images of someone online, and also threatening him with a knife, Gabby then went to court and pled guilty. Now remember what I said before about men and women getting different kinds of sentences and women being viewed more lenient in the court system? This is an example of that, because for all of that what happened, Gabby received a 12 months restraining order and an £80 fine. That's it. No custodial sentence, no suspended sentence, and she had to complete 20 days of rehabilitation work. And I can't help but think that if that was a man who committed those same offences, threatened to post intimate images online of an ex-partner, threatened her with a knife, stalked her and made her fear for her own personal safety, and potentially tried to ruin her life and her career, then I can't imagine that that male would have received the same treatment. But of course, this is just one example which I know of, which I've dealt with personally. I'm sure there are other examples out there of a similar nature, and possibly other examples out there that completely throw what I'm saying out the window. All I'm doing is I'm simply just presenting the evidence of what I've dealt with, and if you agree with me, great. If you don't agree with me, also fine. Let me know in the comments what you actually think. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to my Patreon only section, where I am going to discuss more about the gender disparity when it comes to the law. Things what I've noticed when I've certainly been on the front line of policing is if there has been a domestic assault and two people are making an allegation, male and female make an allegation, majority of the time it's the man that gets locked up. The male rang the police, we turn up, he's got a busted lip, he's got a bite mark on him. So I would love to hear your thoughts. Do you think that I'm wrong when it comes to the disparity in the law and it comes to gender and gender inequality when it comes to sentencing? Do you think that men should be tried more harshly due to the prolific nature that we see in the courts of men committing violent offences? Do you think that women should be treated more harshly due to the nature of women are by society deemed to be more caring, more responsible, and they do have, on the whole, these more caring responsibilities and thus should set a better example? I don't know. I don't know. You let me know. You let me know in the comments what your thoughts are. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I want this channel to grow, and the bigger it grows, the more topics I can talk about, the better the production gets. So by supporting me with liking and subscribing and leaving a comment and potentially even sharing this with someone you think might find it interesting, you are actively helping my channel. See you later.